Mike tells me this car's down on power. Also, the turbo gauge doesn't work. Now, I've checked the vacuum hose and it all seems in order, so I reckon that this turbo is going to need a rebuild. And rebuilding is actually quite straightforward. I've bought a rebuild kit. This was $72, that's about £55. But before I start using it, it's really important to work out exactly how a turbo works. And it's actually quite simple. We all know an engine, when running, releases exhaust gases. And normally those gases are wasted, they escape out the back of the car. But what a turbo does is it makes clever use of those gases and turns them into power. The principles behind a turbo are actually quite simple. There's a pair of hollow chambers, here and here, that inside house a pair of fans. A red one here on the exhaust side because it's hot, a blue one that also has a fan in. Now both those fans are connected together by a centre shaft. That means that they now spin at the same time. Now the first shaft spins because it's powered by the exhaust gases. So the first fan is now spinning the second fan. But what that second fan's doing is it's drawing in cold, fresh air from the outside. That fan is spinning so fast that it actually compresses that oxygen. It jams loads of O2 molecules together, getting more into that tiny space. The byproduct of that means that it actually also gets hot. So when it leaves the second fan, it needs to go via an intercooler. That intercooler now cools that newly compressed air. The air, now cold and compressed, is pumped back into the engine. And the great thing about cold, compressed air is that it's full of oxygen. And of course, engine relies on fuel and oxygen to go bang. So really, turbos are actually quite simple. No wires, no computers. In fact, all cars should have them. Now that's all the loose bits off, and a little tip. Make sure you mark the orientation of the turbo housing so it goes back together the same way. So I just put a little scratch in here. And there it is. That is the heart of our turbo. You can see both fans. In fact, if I use the drawing perfectly to scale, the exhaust turns this fan, spins the cold side, and it's this that creates the power. And it's amazing to think something so small can create so much power. But this wheel here is spinning so fast it can go up to 120,000 turns a minute. And the problem is if there's a little bit of play, the tolerance inside this shroud is so minute that if it hits, you're going to have big problems. And I can hear it. It's got a bit of play in it already. It's a good job we took this apart. To remove the shaft, I've got to undo this little nut on the end. But what's important is that this is a left-handed thread. The reason it's left-handed is because of centrifugal forces. If it was right-handed, it would run the risk of undoing. The shaft doesn't look too bad. It's that joins the two fans together, makes them turn at the same time. The reason this is wobbly is because inside here, there's two little brass collars. And I bet you it's them that's warm. And inside here is a tiny little thrust bearing. Second bearing. It's amazing that all these tiny parts have such a big impact on our car. This generates so much extra power. And I reckon I know what the problem is. The bearing that supports the shaft has a little bit of play in it. That means the shaft wobbles ever so slightly. That lets in a little bit of oil. That would account for what Mike smells at the exhaust. But also it would mean it would clog the catalytic converter. And this, combined with that and the cat, means a reduction in power. Get all of this fixed, get it back on the car as good as new, and we're going to get all that power back. But first, I need to clean it up, starting with this.